Hello.
Tomorrow, we're learning at the shul at 6:10. The shul's Daf Yomi is going to be joining us because Rabbi Krause and his substitute are at a rabbinic seminar. So it's going to be one Daf Yomi, us and them.
Okay.
Okay. We are on Daf 8, Ches.
Yeah.
Is Harold in Palm Springs or is he in town?
Could be in town, but I don't know. Walter?
Walter is in town. He called me about an hour ago.
Hmm.
Well, wait a minute, but first, and then we'll start.
Okay. Oh,
Okay. Ches, Ches Omad Aleph, on the top.
Yes, please.
Amrab Zermer Shmuel. Libein Sakin. If someone took a knife and heated it up so it was white hot. So any kind of knife, whether it was treif, whether it had been used, it was something non-kosher, through being heated with white hot heat, any forbidden flavor absorbed in the knife would be removed. So shochat ba, if you use such a knife to shecht, was shchita sukshera. The shchita is okay. What's the chiddush here? You have to cut two simonim, the trachea and the esophagus. And you have to cut them. You can't burn them. This knife is white hot. So Shmuel is teaching us that the tissue does not, it's cut and maybe afterwards it's burned, but it's not. If you burnt the trachea and the esophagus, it would not be a kosher shchita, it would be treif. And the Gemara says, because chidudea koydem lilibuna, the sharpness of the knife cuts before the heat. So as the Gemara Vayikot studying, the knife has sides to it. So maybe after the sharp edge cuts, the sides of the knife will burn the esophagus and the trachea before the shechita is finished. And for the Gemara Beis Shechita, mirvach rovach, the trachea and the esophagus open up. As the knife cuts it, the sides of the knife do not come in contact with either the trachea or esophagus because it opens as it gets cut. Okay. Iboilu. Liben shpud vihikabo. Person took a metal spit, heated it, and then he struck a person with this heated spit. Now, we're going to deal a little bit with saras. The Chumash talks about two types, shchin and michva. Shchin is an inflammation. Like when you got hit with a blow and it becomes red, it's inflamed. Michva is a burn. Now, if you see a white spot in the middle of either an inflammation or a burn, so then the Kohen will put the person in quarantine for a week and come back and inspect it. If certain things happen to it, like if a white hair grows or it spreads, then he will declare the person tamei, and it's true tsaras. And the Torah talks about two different types of tsaras, one that occurs in an inflammation area, and one that occurs in a burn. So the Gemara now is asking, when you're struck on your arm with a hot metal, and then let's say a week later you develop a white lesion there, is it a tsaras that develops in shchin? Shchin defines an inflammation, or mishum michva, or in a burn. Now the Gemara says, "L'may nafkamina." Now, the truth is, there's no difference in din whether the person is declared at tsaras through shchin or michva. So what do we care? Asks the Gemara. So the Gemara says we do care. L'chiditanya. Shchin u'michva metamin b'shavua echad b'shnei simonim. At the end of a week, if you have a white lesion in the middle of a shchin, which is an inflammation, or a white lesion in the middle of a burn, you have to inspect it a week later, and there are two simonim that are going to arise there where the kohen will diagnose tsaras. B'seir lavan uv'fisyon, a white hair growing, or that it spreads. If it does neither, after a week, then the person doesn't have tsaras. If there's a white hair or it spreads, he has tsaras. So the Gemara asks, Lama chilkan hakasuv, or the Brisa asks, why did the Torah give us two versions? One is a shchin and one is a michva. Loy mar shein mitzdarfin zem zem. So what I didn't explain is for it to be declared a tsaras, the white lesion has to be the size of a gris. A gris is like a bean. So if it's less than a gris, it's not tsaras. Now, if you had one next to another, a half gris of shchin that arised out of an inflammation, and a half gris that arised out of a michva, out of a burn, they're not mitzaref. So that's why we had to be taught by the Torah that there's two types. Vitanya, ezer shchin ve'ezu michva. When do you have an inflammation, a shchin, and when do you have a burn? So, loka be'etzu be'evan. You were struck on the arm by a piece of wood or a stone. Begefet or bechamit feria, or with a stick from an olive tree, or hot water from the hot springs in Tveria. Anything that comes not necessarily directly from fire. Like lead. When you mine lead from the ground, it's hot enough, but it's not fire. But it will cause an inflammation. Zehu shchin. That which arises after being struck by these items, it'll be a shchin. That's the kind of wound it is. Vezeu michva. What's a burn wound? Nichva begachelos beremes. Somebody put a hot coal on your skin, or hot ashes. Besid roseach, hot lime. Begafsis roseach, gypsum that's boiling. Uvechol dover haba machmasaur lasui chame, or like water that's heated by a fire, not natural like chamet feria, but like boiling water that's heated by a fire, and then it pours on a person's arm and he has a burn. Zui michva. So that's how we categorize shchin versus michva. Vitanya, shchinu michva. So we look at what happens last. If somebody im shchin koidim lemichva, if a person on his arm had an inflammation and then he burned, bitel michvas shchin, So the shchin goes away and he's treated as a mikvah, and vice versa. If a person had a burn wound, via mikvah kodemis l'shchin, and then you got struck by a stone and you have an inflammation, bitel shchin is a mikvah. And now the Gemara gets to our point. Hacha hechidami. Kagon dahava bechatzi gris shchin mikara. A person had a half gris of a shchin tsaras on his arm. The liben shpud, and he heated up a metal stick, vihikabo, and struck the guy on his arm next to that half gris. The nafak b'chatzi gris acher. And now there was an original shchin, half a gris, and now you have a new half a gris. The question is, if we treat it like a mikvah, we've already learned, shchin and mikvah are not mitzdarif. If it would be done like a shchin, then a half gris of shchin and a half gris of shchin will be additive. So so now you were struck on the arm by a hot iron stick. Do we say chavata kodem? First, the guy got injured by a direct blow. But then the burn came and was mavatal the blow. So now you have a shchin and a mikvah, havale shchin and mikvah, v'lo mitzdarfin. The din would be he's not a tsaras. Oy dil mahavla kodim. Or maybe when he's struck, the first injury is the burn, and then asi chavata, then the damage caused by the blow comes mavatal and gets rid of the burn, so it's treated like a shchin. And now you have the pre-existing shchin, havale shchin u'shchin, u'mitzdarif. So now the Gemara is going to bring our brisa, Toshma, Amar Reb Zeir Amar Shmuel. Libein sakin v'shochat ba. You took a knife, you heated it up to be white hot, and you shechted with it. We said shchitasuk sheva, because chiduda koidem lilibuna. The sharpness of the knife precedes the heat. Alma chavata kodem. So we see that the direct injury comes before the burn. And then since the burn comes afterwards, it would be treated as a burn. So in the case that we brought of the half gris and the half gris being struck with a white hot shpud, they would not be mitzdarif, based on the raya from our brisa. The Gemara says no proof. Chidud shiny, being struck with a blunt item versus a sharp knife, so you can't learn from there. Because maybe the burn will happen by a non-knife. The burn happens before the wound. So toshma, libein shpud v'hikabo. You heated up a metal spit and you struck somebody with it. So nidon mishum michvasesh. So the wound happens first, the blow, and then it becomes burn, because we always follow the last thing. Alma chavata kodem. So we see that the direct blow happens first. So the Gemara says Hasam Nami the Barzi Michris. There he was injured by the tip of the spit. So again, it's like a knife, but the question of just a traumatic blow that's not sharp, we don't really know, and that's how the Gemara ends. Sakin shlavot is kechavim, a knife that was used to shecht an animal, which was shechted in front of an idol. Now you can't have so the knife becomes asr bano. 1 second. I already got it. Okay. Sakin shlavritz kachavim. Muter lishchad ba. You're allowed to shecht an animal with it. You're not allowed to have hana. So we'll see v'aser lachtach ba basar. But as a butcher, you wouldn't be able to cut up pieces of meat with that knife. Let's understand. Muter lishchad ba because mekalkel. Strange that it seems to us, a live animal is worth more than a geshechted animal. You can work it, it can pull a wagon, it can work in a field. Now when you shecht it, all you can do is eat it. So you've reduced its value. So you're mekalkel. It's not considered that you're benefiting from it. Therefore, you're allowed to use that knife for shchita. However, asur lachtel babasar, because misakenu, when a butcher cuts meat to be eaten, so that is a hana. That you're not allowed to do. Amar Rava, pamim shashoichet asur. Sometimes it'll be asur to benefit from a shechted animal. Be mesukenes. Let's say an animal is about to die, so you have no use for it. So you better shecht it quick, and at least get the meat. There, it's a benefit. So in that case, where it's a benefit, you're not allowed to shecht, or the shechita will be asur. And mechatech mutter, you could have situations where cutting meat is permitted. Be'atni dekaimin lekorkbana. If you have big pieces of meat, like a shoulder, like the thigh, where when you send that as a whole thing, so that's a very nice gift for a celebrity. When you cut it up, it's not as valuable. So here's an example where cutting meat is mekalkel. So then you can use that knife. Now comes the beginning of our sugyas that relate to kashrus. Why Chullin is the source Gemara for a lot of the sugyas in Yordeya. V'tepukle mishum sham nunis disura. We assume if this knife was used to shecht in front of an idol, that they were using it for non-kosher meat. There's a concept of belia, that the flavor of the non-kosher meat gets absorbed by the knife. Now, normally, blias occur through heat of yad soletispo. So, and the flavor is flavor, the tam, the taste of something non-kosher is, there's a principle in kashrus called tam ki'ikr. The flavor is like having the non-kosher item there as well. So here, the absorption of the flavor into the knife, how did it occur? There's no heat. So the Gemara will say there is heat, because the neck of the animal, the Beis HaShchita, warms up. And l'chora, that's going to be enough to absorb the flavor. Or other Rishonim learn that it's the duchka de sakina, the knife. By the sharpness of the knife causes absorption. And this plays a big role in the kosher kitchen. Why many of our wives have a parve knife. Because if the duchka de sakina, along with the dover chorif, for example, if you cut an onion, so normally, if you have a kli that's beyond 24 hours, so the flavor that was absorbed into that kli becomes a bad flavor. It's called noisen tam livgam. So if the kli has not been used within 24 hours, if it's been used 24 hours, the flavor is still there and it's not livgam. But beyond 24 hours, the flavor is pogum. and therefore does not usher something when it goes into something. However, even 5 days, 2 weeks later,
Nice.
if you cut an onion with that knife, the flavor, the bad flavor will be resurrected. And it can go into a food. And if it was not kosher, it'll trafe up whatever you're cutting. So better to have a parv knife that you, and parv also because the knife could be meat or milk, and the knife, the pressure of the knife also, if you're cutting a dover charif, it's not enough that the pressure of the knife alone. And that's the machlokas rishon that we're not going to go into. But it's usually the pressure of the knife as well as something dover charif. Now here we're not dealing with something dover charif. Here it's either the pressure of the knife alone or the heat of the Beis HaShchita. And the Gemara is asking the question, how can you use such a knife in any situation? There is treif absorption in the knife. And for the Gemara b'chadasha, we're talking about a new knife. It had never been used to shech. For the Gemara chadasha, if it had never been used, bein Rabbi Shmuel, bein Rabbi Kiva, misham shever kechavim enu, misham shever kechavim enu nasur not sheyavtu. Something that is used as a kli to service an idol is only going to become prohibited unless once you use it. If it's never been used, there's never going to be any kind of isser.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't be talking about a new knife. So the Gemara says, it didn't absorb forbidden flavors because it wasn't used to cut meat. They used the knife to cut a piece of wood in service of the idol. So it becomes usser, and therefore we have to deal with the issue of if you shecht with such a knife, it's kosher, but if you cut up meat, it's not. Or it was a knife that was used to cut meat, non-kosher meat, but they had koshered it with white hot fire. So it's a kosher knife. But because it was used in service of the Avodah Zarah, we have this din in that you can't cut meat with it because you can't have a no. Okay. Itmar. Hashoichet besakin shelo v'kochavim. Now, we're not talking about Avodah Zarah now. We're talking about a knife that belongs to a goy. The goy has used this knife for non-kosher meat. So we've said there's either shamnunis, there's fat, or there's an absorbed flavor, and you shecht an animal. Rav Amar Koilev. So, the Rav Arachana Amar Mediach. Koilev means you cut it. So, in the neck, where you shechted this animal, there was absorption right next to the meat where the knife was. So Rav says you have to cut that away kadei klipa. Kadei klipa is like the width of a fingernail. So if you cut away that meat that touched the knife, the rest of the meat is kosher. According to Rabbi Rechana, no, you just wash it. It didn't penetrate, but the fat stays there, and by washing it, that's enough. It doesn't absorb into the meat. And what's the machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Rechana? The Marsa Beis HaShchita Tzoyne. How hot does the neck, when you shecht an animal, get? It's warm, but is it warm enough to cause absorption? Mar Savar Beis HaShchita Roseach. Rav says it is hot enough to cause absorption in the local tissue. Scrubbing with water is not going to get away. You got to remove the kedei klip of the meat. Normally, heat to transfer blias needs to be yad soletispo. But the Beis HaShchita is a area that allows transfer of flavor, even though it's not that hot. So that's Rav. So the Gemara says, is that the explanation of the machlokas? The Gemara says, lo. Kulam Beis HaShchita roseachu. No. Really, everybody holds it is hot enough to cause absorption. Well, if it's hot enough to cause absorption, how come Rabbi Bar Rav Chana gets away with just rinsing it? Mandomer Koilev Shapir. Ravu says you have to cut away a klipa. We understand. However, Mandomer Madiach. So now a new concept. I did a treatise Simonim Lafuke Dam Lo Bali. The tissue in that area, particularly the blood vessels, are giving up its blood. It cannot do both things at the same time. If it's giving up its blood, it can't absorb. And therefore, you don't have to do klipa, just washing it is enough. And this concept of Ida de treaty is something that we see throughout these sugyas. Ikedi Amri, the Kulam Beis HaShchita Tzoyne. They all agree that the warmth in the incision for the neck is not normally hot enough to cause blia. And therefore, Mandomer Madiach Shapir. So that makes sense according to one who says all you have to do is rinse it off because there's no absorption in the tissue. So then we have to explain Ra, Mandomer Koilev, Agav Duch Kedesakina Bola. Because of the pressure of the knife, and maybe because a little bit of even though it's not hot enough normally, the pressure of the knife with a little bit of the heat is enough. Okay. Sakin Treifa. Now let's understand exactly what we're talking about. This is a kosher animal, but it has one of the 18 treifas. It has a hole in the lung, or is that a hole in the stomach? So the shechita is done perfectly well. And now a knife was used to shecht an animal that we discovered is a treifa. Pliga b'ravacha b'ravina. How do we kasher such a knife? Charamar b'chamin. You have to do hagola in hot water, the way we normally kasher. This is holding that the Beis HaShchita is hot enough that there's a blia of the treif meat into the knife. And therefore you need hagola of the knife to use it again. That there is no, it's not hot enough that area to cause a blia, but there is some fat that we have to worry about that's stuck to the knife that you have to clean off even with cold water. The halacha is you can use cold water and that's enough. The blisa de parcel lemichbera. And if you have like a rag, like sandpaper, or for example, you put the knife 10 times in the ground, that will also kasher it. And lo tzarich, you wouldn't even have to wash it at all. Just wiping it with a cloth is enough. According to the Mandomer that says you have to do hagola with hot water, my time. Mishum de Kabbalah Yisura. The knife absorbed the forbidden flavor of the treifa. Usually it's the fat. Knives, because it's hard, doesn't absorb blood. It tends to just slide off. Now the Gemara asks the following interesting question. Why don't we say that every time you shecht any animal, forget about a treif animal, we have a halacha called Ever Menachai. We're not allowed to cut a limb off of a live animal and eat it. Why don't we say that when we shecht a live animal, the flavor of Avrim and Achai comes into that knife. And you have to kasher that knife every time. So the Gemara says, no, you don't have to kasher a knife that is used for shechita of a kosher animal. Because Amos Bala, when is the blia, when is the absorption taking place? L'chi chayma. When we said, when the area of the base of shechita gets hot. When does it get hot? L'chi gamra shechita. The shechita is completely over. At that point, there's no Avrim and Achai. It only starts absorbing flavor from a kosher animal that's been shechted. That meat is kosher. Hahi shaita de'aterav. That's not an isser flavor, it's a mutter flavor. Okay. Amir Amarav. Hatabach tsaris shloisha sakinin. A butcher who also shechts, he needs to operate with 3 knives. Achat sheshoichet ba. He keeps one knife and all he does with it is shechted. The reason for that is because a shechita knife, if it gets nicks or cracks on it, it can trafe up a shechita. So we use it only for shechita. The echad shemechat babas. One knife he used to cut up his meat. The echad shemetach b'chalavim. Now the butcher has to trim away the forbidden chaylev that's connected to the meat. So you don't use the same knife because we're concerned if he cuts the chaylev and he goes right away to cut the meat, there's going to be absorption of the chaylev into the kosher meat. What do you mean? What do you need 2 knives for? Let him do 1 knife. Let him first cut meat, then he cuts the fat. After he cuts the fat, then he washes it. And that's enough. As long as you wash it or wipe it clean, there's no heat here. You're talking about a piece of meat that has been separated from the animal. Now you're carving it up. So there's no absorption of chaylev. It's just there might be fat on the knife. So you got to clean. So he should have 1 knife. He should make sure he cuts meat first, chaylev after. It's just a gzeira. Make radin, that would work. But because he might get confused, he has to have 2 knives. Still, hashanami michlefle. The butchers can confuse the 2 knives. Kivin strachinu trey isleker, because he knows that he needs 2 knives. That's enough of a hecker that he's going to remember. He needs 2 bowls of water. He washes the kosher meat in one. He washes when the forbidden fat is, because he can sell that. The forbidden fat can be sold to non-Jews. Yeah. You can get a hanoah from that. So you need 2 separate bowls. Because again, if you have the same bowl and you washed fat in it, there's going to be fat attached to the side of the bowl. When you wash your meat, it's going to absorb into the meat, or it's going to go to the meat. Just have 1 bowl, let him wash it out after each. Because maybe you're going to wash the fat and then the meat. Even with 2 kelim, you're going to be confused. Again, because you need 2, he will remember. You have a piece of meat with fat on it. You shouldn't place that meat, fat down, on another piece of meat. The doiv tarbo bolabisra. The meat below is going to absorb the fat. So don't put it there. Put the fat on top. Iachi kitrutsunami. If there's no meat on the table, doiv tarbo bolabisra, and the fat is on top, and you put a piece of meat there on top of the table, maybe the fat will enter the kosher meat. Karma mafsik mitatoy. There is a membrane that separates the fat from the meat, and therefore there's not going to be any absorption. Okay. By the way, tomorrow we're going to learn in shul at 6:10. We're learning with the shul.
Ernie, can we table this because it's nearly Shabbos and
Okay, you mean the menachos?
yeah.
Okay, we'll do it next time we learn by video.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
We just have half a block left.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good. Bye.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.